Hello everyone, good morning and welcome to this week's Learn with Lorna. Morning John. Oh, it's so nice to be able to see you this week. This last week when it froze, it was very disconcerting to see just a frozen screen with me in one position and nobody's comments coming up. So I'm so glad, John, to have seen you saying hello there. Hi Jenny. Um, well done for joining me because I'm on leave this week and remembering at this time of year which day of the week it is at all is quite a struggle. So I'm so impressed that people have remembered it's Thursday and come in to join me. So yes, welcome to this week's Learn with Lorna. My name, of course, is Lorna. I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service. As you will know, if you listen to me every week, we have 4 archive centres across the Highlands. We have the Highland Archive and Registration Centre in Inverness, Nucleus, the Nuclear and Caithness Archives in Wick, for Lochaber Archive Centre in Fort William, and Skye and Lochaber Archive Centre in Portree. This series, as you'll know, is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're very, very grateful for that indeed. Oh, it's lovely to see everyone saying hello, and thank you for all your lovely Christmas messages last week. I really hope you all had a nice Christmas, and as I say, I was so frustrated to not be able to see your messages coming in, but I read them all afterwards, so thank you for that. So this is our final Learn with Lorna for the year, and of course the last in our winter and Christmas themed month of December. This week we are looking at our obsession with the weather. It's of course something in Britain that we talk about all the time. That's not just a rumour, that's true. Um, and something that's always at a particular height at this time of the year, because of course we have the obsession with hoping that we're going to get a white Christmas, and then as soon as Boxing Day's passed, that obsession with hoping that it's not going to be a prolonged freezing January and February, followed by snow melt and floods and so on. So we're always talking about the weather, particularly at this time of the year. And of course, extreme weather in terms of particularly snow is something we see a lot of in the Highlands over the years. And it's a subject that's been particularly at the forefront of people's minds this year, I think, on the subject of climate change has become more and more important, more and more at the front of people's minds, and particularly this year with COP26 being held in Glasgow. In Scotland, it's something we are talking about and thinking about a lot. And of course, we've seen a lot of extreme weather events over the last few years. I'm thinking of Jenny with your fires in Australia, and then floods in Germany, and of course it was a few years ago that we had the absolutely horrendous tsunami on Boxing Day. So it's something we talk about a lot, I think. So what do our records tell us about weather, and where do people record their thoughts about weather and climate events in the past? Well, I thought the best way to tackle this was to look at different types of weather and then see what I could find out about them. And it was really comedic as I was making a list of types of weather. I had snow and ice and frost, wind and gales, rains and floods and thunder and lightning. And it was only a full 24 hours later that I remembered that there is also sun and heat. That must be a consequence of living in the north of Scotland, that I didn't really think of them as weather that affects us. I thought a good place to start for looking for references to weather, and especially bad weather, would be the school logbooks. So very reliable, as you'll know on this subject, because of course the teachers would record anything that affected attendance in the school, and bad or severe weather would often, adverse weather would often affect the attendance figures. So I'm going to start by looking at some of those, which talk about the typical weather of winter, so snow and ice and storms and so on. I say typical, I'm aware that people are watching in Australia and that will not be their typical winter weather, but for us it is. So this is an extract from Thrumster School Logbook in Caithness in 1917. Reopened on the 7th of January after the Xmas holidays, but owing to a severe and protracted snowstorm, no pupils were able to put in an appearance until the 28th, as all roads were blocked. This was therefore an involuntary closing of 3 weeks exactly, 7th to the 25th of January inclusive, and therefore the required number of openings were impossible. So you can see they're talking about the severity of the weather meant that all the roads were blocked, 3 weeks that school pupils were not able to attend, and that the reason they're recording it is because it's had an impact on attendance. So that was Thrumster in 1917, but the situation in Staxigo, also in Caithness, wasn't much different the following year. So this is from 1918. 1918, January the 7th, resumed work today. A great storm is raging and the roads are almost impassable owing to snow. January the 8th, no scholars attended today owing to the violence of the snow. January the 11th, there have been few scholars present all week, barely 33%. January the 18th, the school has been shut all week owing to snowstorms. January the 21st, reopened today with very few scholars. January the 25th, there has been a slight improvement in the attendance as the week advanced, but the roads are still very difficult. So you can see there just the effect that this severe weather is having, and that's the pupils missing a month's worth of schooling, which sadly is something we're a bit used to at the moment, missing normal schooling. Now, as we all know, and again, maybe Elizabeth and Sydney, maybe Jenny, maybe the people who are in Australia and New Zealand will not be as familiar with this as we are in Scotland. But as we all know, keeping floors clean in the winter is a constant nightmare when the weather is like that. Now, these extracts are from 1923 in Brabster, and this is the description that the school teacher is writing about keeping the school clean in the snow. December the 14th, 1923. The school was scrubbed on Saturday, which is paid for at a high figure as otherwise the labour could not be procured. But owing to the muddy playgrounds, the school shows little trace of ever being cleansed. The school duster was taken by scholars for football. Dusters are always going astray, although through scholars' carelessness. They deny touching them. The pens, etc., are not taken care of. Work is proceeding as usual. And then December the 18th, the teacher writes, a dreadfully stormy day. One chimney can is threatening to fall. A danger. No scholars so far, or maybe at all. January the 7th, so after they've come back from the Christmas break, the teacher writes, the weather today is exceedingly stormy and cold. Only 3 scholars present this forenoon. The vacation has just ended. The children seem to be pleased to be back at school once more. January the 8th, this cruelly cold, stormy day, all were late, but not too late for registration. January the 9th, a cruelly cold, stormy day, still only 3 scholars. January the 10th, weather continues very severe. Snowstorms yesterday and drifting today. Only 1 boy present this forenoon. So you can see there that just constant reference to the winter weather, to the fact that the storms are making it difficult to for pupils to attend, for staff to attend, for the school to be cleaned, for just everything being much harder. Tanya, I'm seeing that you're on cyclone watch in Australia as well. Oh my word. Yes, that's something much more scary probably than snow. So moving over to Skye and Loch Alsh, we've got references in the collections there as well. So the personal diaries of Donald Gillis, which I've mentioned before, and they echo these experiences of the snow. This is his entry. So this is a personal diary for the 13th of January, 1955. 13th of January, 1955. A severe storm of drifting and powdery snow suddenly struck Skye, which blocked roads, etc. Mr. Souter, the Skye District Road Surveyor, is to be congratulated in his success in setting in motion an all-night snowplough patrol on the main roads of the island. There were several exciting experiences by several persons trying to get to their destination during the night and early morning. With continued long showers and strong winds, several of the roads for a time were blocked with drifting snow. By a regular system of shifts working day and night with snowploughs, the roads ultimately were cleared for traffic. The roads in districts of North Trotternish and Waternish had the worst blocking. The mail van from Portree to Stathen managed to get to its destination the following morning, but the bus failed to catch the Portree steamer. And of course, that's 1955, which was the year of Operation Snowdrop, which I did a talk on last January, so just about a year ago. So if you're interested in more about Operation Snowdrop, which was quite extraordinary way of tackling severe weather, then please do go back and have a look at that. And then, of course, it's not just snow that causes problems. When the temperature drops below zero, the frost and ice come, and with them they bring all sorts of other problems. And this is a letter written in 1742 by Simon Fraser, Lord Lovett, held in our Lochaber Archive Centre. And he's writing to Donald Cameron of Lochiel. The weather is severe here, and the frost more intense than can be expressed. All our rivers are frozen over, so that a coach and six with loaded carts might gallop over them. Our cattle suffer a great deal, and it is even hard upon men's health. The frost is so very severe that hardly any human body can resist it long without being the worse for it. God pity our old distressed mother Scotland, for she cannot be able to bear her burden very long, and after this severe winter, if we have not a good spring, and a good price for our Highland cattle, all the Highlands will be ruined, for most of them are in a great distress already, and they know not what hand to turn to. And that, I think, is that's somebody wealthy and at the top of the social scale writing there. But it's an insight into what it would be if you weren't, if you were poorly off, if your house was cold. He's writing there saying that the Highlands will struggle to survive past this. There's another letter that he writes round about the same time where he describes his continued determination to take a cold bath every day, despite the fact that the River Bewley is frozen solid. But he says, I'll continue to take a cold bath every single day, and I'm as fit and healthy. I could dance a minuet as well as I could when I was young. And the effects of that freezing weather, that very, very bitterly cold weather, is also seen in other records. So the 1919 school logbook entry for Achnarrow School, which is near Cromdale, Granton Way, records an intense frost on the 7th of February that year, making the school very uncomfortable for younger children because the temperature in the classroom was -3 or 26 Fahrenheit. I think I've got that equivalent right. -3 degrees Celsius at 10:30 a.m., despite the fact that the fires had been lit in the classroom for nearly 3 hours by that point. Or how about this extract? This is from 1939 in Strathconnan, so near Dingwall kind of way. So this is the reopening in 1939 after Christmas. Attendance 76%. So of course the pupils have been able to get in because there's no snow stopping them, but the attendance is low owing to the very cold weather. The temperature in school has never risen above freezing point, and today it is 4 degrees below freezing point. Last night there were 34 degrees of frost. During extremely cold weather, the fire in school, even when as big as possible, does not make the room even warm. The pupils would be unable to do any work at all if they were not allowed to take turns at working near the fire. And then, perhaps unsurprisingly, the following week, the attendance is very low because the pupils all have influenza. But it's just quite extraordinary, isn't it, to think, we now have that's in legislation now about the conditions people can work in and study in, that you can't work above a certain temperature, below a certain temperature. And that's extraordinary that they just carried on. Rod, I'm seeing you saying that was your primary school. I'm guessing when you were there, it was not -34 outside and -4 in the classroom. But please do correct me. I'll be fascinated to hear if that's true. The Spian Bridge Police Daily Occurrence Book for 11th of December 1892 records what happened to P.C. MacDonald when he went to take a statement from someone who had a very severe run-in with cold weather. So this is Spian Bridge Police Daily Occurrence Book, 1892. Saturday at 9 a.m. I left the station and proceeded along the railway works to Lubnaclach, where I took a statement from Peter Patterson, aged 25 years, a labourer residing at Lubnaclach in the parish of Kilmonavig in this county, which states, About 10 a.m. on the Monday the 5th, so he's taking this statement from this gentleman, and this is what the gentleman said. About 10 a.m. on Monday the 5th, I left Fogarty's hut on the moor of Rannoch with the intention of going to work on the railway works. Sometime after dark, I reached the Gar River shelter. I went to the door and asked if I would get to stay in the stable all night, as the night was very stormy with drift and snow. When I was refused, I went away. I didn't go far when I lost my way and did not know where I was. I wandered backwards and forwards on the moor from Monday night the 5th until Thursday night the 8th, when I was found by John MacLeod, who carried me to the railway hut at Lubnaclach, where I stay at present. I got my feet and hands frostbitten, and I am not able to move. So it's the consequences of that severe weather can be life-changing. And of course, the follow-up to all of this snowfall and frost and ice is the inevitable melt and the chaos and destruction that comes with snowmelt and floods. Let me pull. Sorry, my screen skipped a page. So that after the snow melts, we end up often with complete destruction as the water rises. And this is an extract that talks a little bit about that. On the 8th of January 1892, so that same year as that policeman, a severe snowstorm fell across the Highlands that was to have disastrous consequences for much of the region. Initially, it was heavy snow that caused problems, and in the Bewley Public School logbook for this date, the teacher records that attendance was very low in consequence of the severe snowstorm. However, the extreme wintry conditions were swiftly followed by a sudden thaw, which led to the great floods of 1892. Strathglass and the Bewley Valley were some of the areas to face the most severe disruption, with all but one road bridge in the Strath being washed away. The River Bewley rose to such a height that it swept across the fields as far as 300 yards from the riverbed. The only bridge to withstand this torrent was the Thomas Telford construction, the Lovett Bridge. The Lovett Bridge was designed by Telford and built between 1811 and 1814 as part of Telford's programme of road and bridge building in Scotland. It's typical of Telford's style and was built in red sandstone at a cost of £8,802. After the storm had passed and the waters had subsided, the Lovett Bridge was declared unsafe due to structural damage. However, this didn't stop people using it, as it was the only means of crossing the river. Engineers came to examine the structure of the bridge and didn't see any reason to believe that the damage would be fatal. It was only with good luck that no one lost their lives, as around 5 o'clock on Wednesday the 10th of February, the bridge gave way, and a Mr. Andrew Mackintosh witnessed a noise resembling the loudest thunder as the bridge came crashing down. Afterwards, long discussions were held as to whether the bridge should be rebuilt entirely or just repaired. In a report regarding the state of the bridge, it was advised that the existing structure could be restored in a thoroughly efficient and permanent manner at considerably less cost than a new bridge could be erected. 3 suggestions were put forward as to how best to proceed, and the parties concerned came to an agreement, a contract given to Mr. Best of Edinburgh to carry out the repair works at a cost of £6,000. The bridge reopened in autumn 1894. So that it's quite a frightening extract, I think, although obviously they repaired it and they were able to sort it, but it's that thought of the unknown damage underneath. So they thought it was fine, but then it collapsed. And we know that from the news all the time, the level of complete destruction that water can cause. And the same thing had happened in Inverness some 50 years earlier. On the morning of the 25th of January 1849, after heavy rain and a sudden thaw, the inhabitants of Inverness awoke to find that the River Ness had burst its banks. Large parts of the town were flooded, and the old stone bridge between Bridge Street and Young Street had been swept away. Built in 1685 by public subscription, this bridge not only linked the 2 parts of the town, but also carried the main road to the north and northwest. With the river level rising fast, the town council declared a state of emergency and immediately took steps to ascertain the extent of the damage and make provision for those driven for their homes. It quickly became apparent that the level of Loch Ness had risen dramatically, and the embankment between the river and the canal at Dochgarach had been breached. Mr. May, the canal engineer, and a team of men were already working to repair the damage, and the council requested that regular updates be sent back to Inverness regarding the water level and the progress of repairs. In the town itself, barriers were built to protect property in Bridge Street, and a close watch kept on the new wooden bridge at Grant Street, which was also in danger of being swept away. As a precaution, this was closed to all but essential traffic. Flood relief centres were set up at the Poor House, Dr. Bell's institution, and the Northern Meeting Rooms, where broth and bread were provided, money from the town's destitution fund being used for this purpose. At 6 o'clock in the evening on the 27th of January, it was reported that Tanner's Lane, Tomnahurra Street, Young Street, and King Street were free of water, and the following morning, the 28th, Mr. May's dispatch read: Our operations hitherto have been as successful as could possibly be anticipated, and although I cannot yet pronounce us out of danger, I consider the danger greatly diminished. However, the new bridge was still giving cause for concern, and under the direction of Mr. Joseph Mitchell, 30 loads of stone were placed around the wooden piles to prevent them from being further undermined. Finally, on the 31st of January, Mr. May reported that the situation at Dochgarach was under control and the emergency was over. Mr. Mitchell stated the repairs to the new bridge were already underway, with the expectation that it would reopen to carts and carriages the following morning. The town council, whilst rejoicing that there had been no loss of life as a result of the flooding, estimated the cost of the damage to be around £2,600. A bill to enable the replacement bridge was quickly drafted and approved by Parliament, allowing the construction of the new suspension bridge. So we get a real sense there of the cost, both in lives, fortunately not in those instances, but the cost of repairing these things as well. Among the collections at Nucleus, our Caithness archive, are lots of items relating to the Caithness coastline, which I've talked about a lot during the course of this series. But of course, the coastline is intimately linked with the weather and weather events. So, for instance, at Nucleus, we hold the Shipping Incident Protocol book of Peter Keith. Now, if you've been watching these for any length of time, Peter Keith was the father of David Barrigal Keith and Christina Keith, both of whom I've talked about. And that book dates from 1887 to 1914, and it records shipping incidents at Thurso River Harbour, Scrabster, Castle Hill, and the North Coastline. And here is an extract from that book that talks about particularly foggy weather and the impact that fog had on the shipping. At Thurso, the first day of September in the year 1887, between the hours of 10 and 11 appeared personally George Wild Hunter, master of the steamship of London, of the burden of 1,466 tons, so that's the size of the ship. Register or thereby solemnly represented and sent forth that the said steamship, having been properly ballasted with water ballast in Dublin, sailed thence bound to Sunderland. That on the night of the 28th day of August last, when between Cape Wrath and the Pentland Firth, it came upon a very thick fog, which continued during the night and morning of the 29th day of August last. That the said steamship kept her course, but it was impossible to see land or light owing to the dense fog. That about 1:20 a.m. on the 29th of August, the said steamship struck on rocks at Dunnet Head, on taking the entrance to the Pentland Firth. That every effort was made to get her off the strand, but she stuck fast, and there remains, and has become a total wreck. Therefore protest against the said fog and thick weather in common form. For more particulars, refer to the logbook. So it's saying there that if it hadn't been for the fog, this wouldn't have happened. They lost course. They went that particularly dangerous stretch of water between Cape Wrath and the Pentland Firth, that area, and so had become stranded and stuck on the rocks at Dunnet Head because, exactly as a result of the fog. There are also letters in our family collections, of course, that talk about the impact of storms and gales on the country. So, for instance, there's a letter, 29th of October, 1863, written by James McIver, who was a schoolmaster in Wick, writing to James Calder, in which he says, "We recently had a gale here, which if it blew as well at Dunnet Head, would have troubled you not a little at the Ha, I suspect, had you been there. It blew off the point of the spire of our new free church here, and smashed the roof of the house, of the house of Mrs. Smellie, Dr. Smelly's widow, considerably. Um, Imagine a wind so strong that it blows the top of the spire off a church. Um, and then, of course, there are also references to much less common weather events. And I'm seeing they're talking about cyclone watch and so on. We have some references to less common weather events in our collections. There have been several earthquakes in Inverness over the past few centuries. And as I was writing this, I was like, is an earthquake a weather event? But you'll stretch a point with me, I'm sure. So yes, there have been several earthquakes in and around Inverness over the past few centuries, notably one in 1816, and a contemporary report of that earthquake notes this. About 20 minutes before 11 p.m., a violent shock of an earthquake, accompanied by a noise like distant thunder, was very distinctly felt here. Some of the inhabitants who had retired to rest were suddenly tossed out of their beds, and many were terribly alarmed by the universal shaking of the houses, the rattling of the slates, and the tremendous crash of large stones, which were precipitated with violence from many of the chimney tops. Happily, however, due to the lateness of the hour, very few persons were in the streets, and consequently no lives were lost. And apparently that earthquake was felt as far away as Edinburgh, Glasgow, and Aberdeen, and it was responsible for twisting the spire of the toll booth by several inches, so it faced a completely different direction as a result of that earthquake. There was another earthquake in September 1901, which was centred on Dochgarach, and it caused a large crack to appear in the canal towpath. And the Inchmore Kirkhill school logbook, which is just over the hill from that, noted that the severe earthquake shock of the 18th has seriously damaged the tall school chimney on the east side, and also the westerly one in the dwelling house. It also cracked the ceiling of the school and the house very badly. And as I was thinking about that, it's not something I know we've had very minor earthquakes in my time here, but so minor as to not be really consequential. But it's quite extraordinary given the fact that the canal follows the Great Glen fault line that we don't suffer more from that. And I know certainly some of you will be watching in countries where you've suffered much, much more from that. And then another uncommon weather event was recorded in the Northern Ensign newspaper of the 2nd of September 1890. And the article is entitled Damage by a Whirlwind at Leibster. So this is Caithness again. Leibster, August the 30th. On Tuesday last, we experienced one of the heaviest rainfalls which has occurred here for several years. There was a light breeze blowing from the north-northeast, accompanied by an occasional heavy shower, which continued until midday, when a steady downpour began, which gradually increased so that by 9 p.m. the water came down in sheets amidst dense darkness. At a few minutes to 10 o'clock, the inhabitants in that part of the village, known as the top of the road, were suddenly alarmed by having the houses struck by a violent gale of wind which shook the buildings to their foundations. The house of Mr. David Ross, merchant, which is situated at the east corner, where the roads meet, was shaken to such an extent that the doors which were bolted were burst open. Mr. Morrison, saddler, had his house door also blown open, and the lamp which stood on the lobby table was thrown down and broken. So violent was the shock that the family were greatly alarmed, thinking that it must have been an earthquake. It only lasted about 2 minutes. The Reverend Mr. Dunn's house was also much shaken, and his doors were burst open. The police office on the opposite side of the street was struck, and the vegetables in the garden considerably damaged. Mr. McCarty, coal merchant, who had just arrived from Wick, was not a little surprised to find his house shaken to the very foundations by a terrific blast of which there was no appearance when he'd entered a few minutes earlier. The whirlwind travelled in a southwesterly direction, and next came into contact with the house of Mr. John Campbell, crofter, at Burnside, blowing open the door and shaking the house to such an extent that the plaster burst off the walls. It lifted at the same time a bale of hay belonging to Mr. Campbell, which contained 150 stones, leaving only about 2 feet of it standing. After about 2 minutes, the usual calm prevailed. Unfortunately, and fortunately for us in the north of Scotland, weather events like those last few are very, very uncommon. And I'm conscious, as I've said, that people who are watching will be much more affected by earthquakes and whirlwinds and cyclones and so on than we are. We're much more used to weather like that recorded in the 1928 Drumbeg school logbook. 26th of October 1928, a morning of torrential rain. The scholars who attended were all soaked through and all had to be sent home at once. I hope you've enjoyed listening to some of those stories to do with weather. I could have gone on and on and on because we are so obsessed with the weather and it's mentioned in so many different collections that I could have looked at many, many others. So maybe next year we'll do weather all over again. I wanted to close by saying thank you. Thank you for your company for the last year. Thank you for your donations, both financial, which are very much appreciated, and also to those of you who've donated collections to us. That's also really, really appreciated. Thank you for all your lovely messages and kindnesses to me and to the team. They're really very, very much appreciated. I can't tell you. I hope you can join me in 2022 when we'll be looking at a whole range of other stories and items from across our collections. I'm really excited about January's theme. It's called, I've titled the theme for January, Archiving Through the Ages. So I'm going to open on the first Thursday of the new year by looking at a little bit about the story of the Archive Service, a little bit about where we're going, what we do, introduce some of the staff and so on. So I'm really excited for that. So I hope you can join me for that one. I wanted to finish by sharing with you a poem written in Anne Fraser's diary of 1828. And it's entitled Hogmanay. Hogmanay, or the last night of the year. Welcome, welcome, Hogmanay, happy, happy, joyous day, when with mirth and gladness all crowd into the festive hall. All forget their sorrows past and hope that joy for age will last. With song and laugh and rare good cheer, they welcome in the coming year. See the tables richly spread with bun and cake and fine shortbread, and cheese that by your dreams will show whether you'll have a wife or no. So now the hot pint can goes round, and now the clock they hear it sound, and each springs quickly from his seat, his neighbour with a kiss to greet. Thank you so much for joining me all year. Looking forward to chatting to you all again in 2022. See you next week, and a reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. That High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're very grateful for that. Thank you.